Antes de darmos início ao evento, gostaríamos de reforçar o seguinte disclaimer. As manifestações expressas por integrantes dos quadros da Fundação Getúlio Vargas e por convidados que participam dos eventos e transmissões online representam exclusivamente as opiniões dos seus autores e não refletem, necessariamente, a posição institucional da FGV. Após este vídeo de aviso, solicitamos a autorização para o uso da imagem e da voz dos palestrantes mediante manifestações de concordância, tais como um aceno de cabeça ou outro gesto de aprovação. Agradecemos sua participação e desejamos um excelente evento.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Julia Maciel, and I'd like to thank you for joining us for today's webinar on the war in Ukraine and the new geopolitical scenario in Eurasia. This event is a partnership between the School of International Relations at FGV and Japan House São Paulo. And before introducing our speakers, just like a quick confirmation following the copyright information video. Is everyone in agreement? A nod will do. Thank you so much. With that, it's now my pleasure to introduce our speakers. First, we have Dr. Atsuko Higashino, who will begin with a lecture. Dr. Higashino is Professor of International Studies at the University of Tsukuba. She holds a PhD in Political Science from the University of Birmingham, as well as an MA and BA in Political Science from Keio University. Her research focuses on European Union enlargement, the European Neighborhood Policy, the Eastern Partnership, EU-China relations, and the Ukraine crisis and Russian-Ukraine war. Following her lecture, we will have commentary from Dr. Ryu Tinto, who is teaching professor of international relations at FGV. He holds a PhD in political science and international studies from the University of Birmingham, an MA in political science and international relations from Nova, University of Lisbon, and a BA in international relations from PUC-Rio. His research interest focuses on international security, especially political violence and interstate conflict. After that, we will have a Q&A session with questions from the audience. There's a Slido link in the YouTube chat where you can submit your questions. And before we begin, I'd like to invite the president of Japan House São Paulo, Mr. Carlos Rosa, to offer his opening remarks. Mr. Rosa, thank you very much for being here and for the continued collaboration with FGV. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Julia. Thank you very much for your introduction. Well, first of all, I'd like to start my few words by thanking Dr. Atsuko Higashino from Japan. It's a pleasure to have you with us again, and also to thank Professor Daniel Ryu Tinto for being with us. It's a pleasure to be here and hear your opinions. Well, for Japan House São Paulo, it's a real pleasure to be organizing this event with FGV. We as a I don't know if everybody knows about Japan House, but giving you a brief introduction, we are a project that has as main objective to present the actual Japan, the modern Japan, to Latin America. We are 3 Japan houses in the world, one based in São Paulo, one in London, and one in Los Angeles. And Japan House São Paulo was the first of the 3 to open its doors in 2017. So we are completing 9 years this year. And since we started, we already received more than 4.5 million visitors physically in our installations in Paulista Avenue in the city of São Paulo. And we are also present in our website, our social media, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube channel, and so on. Well, our mission is to present Japan and do this by several aspects. Probably the aspects that the people knows the most are our exhibitions, but we just not exhibit artist things. We also bring to the discussion events like this one today, because as you will hear from the professors, the world is changing. Sometimes I ask myself if it's changing for better or not, but probably they will emit their opinion, and I'm sure that we'll learn a lot today with these 2 specialists. So thank you very much for joining us. Thank you, Julia, for the introduction. Professors, it's a pleasure to be here with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rosa. Professor Higashino, you may begin your lecture. Thank you.
Hello, good evening and good morning for those who are listening from Japan and for those listening from Brazil, of course. Thank you very much, Julia-san, for your wonderful and very kind introduction. So once again, my name is Yoshino, and I'm speaking about the Russian aggression against Ukraine in order to deepen the discussion with you. So let me please share my slide. So can you see my slide properly? Yes, thank you very much. So the title is The War in Ukraine and the New Geopolitical Scenario in Eurasia. So I'm speaking specifically about the what is really going on in terms of the Russian aggression against Ukraine. And at the same time, I would like to focus more on East Asia. So how Japan is trying to deal with the issue, how Japan's international security environment has changed during the course of war, and what is the lesson that Japan learned from this aggression, and how Japan can cooperate with other potential supporters and cooperative countries, including Brazil. So the structure of the lecture. I would like to provide the overview of the war, but at the same time, I would like to start with the terminology. So sometimes it is called the war. It's called in a very mixed way. So the title of this lecture today is the war in Ukraine. So I followed what has been proposed to me, and the usage of the word of the war in Ukraine is perfectly okay. But at the same time, I myself prefer to use the term of Russian aggression against Ukraine, because I try to make it clear that it is Russia who started aggression, and it is Ukraine which is the victim of the whole aggression. So from my viewpoint, the war in Ukraine may have a potential or risk of obscuring who is the aggressor and who is the victim. So throughout this lecture, I rather would like to use the term of Russian aggression against Ukraine. So please allow me to do so. So in my lecture, I would like to introduce the major development from 2014 to 2026. I'm doing this because I've got a lot of friends in Ukraine, and if I say, for example, the Ukraine has having got its 5th year of the aggression, my Ukrainian friends would be very, very unhappy about this, because according to them, the whole thing started in 2014 when Russian started the annexation of Crimea, and when the Donbas War started on the same year. So everything started with the 2014. It means that it is the 12th year of the whole aggression. Okay. So very, very briefly, I will start my very, very brief presentation from 2014, and then I will follow each and respective year from the start of the full-fledged or full-scale aggression by Russia in 2022. And thirdly, I'd like to touch upon the issue of how Russian aggression against Ukraine is having an implication for East Asia. I'm speaking notably about the influence posed by China and the North Korea. And I'd like to introduce how Japan responded throughout the course of the full-scale aggression, starting from 2022 and up until this year, 2026. So I try to characterize all the responses that Japan took during the course of this aggression. Lastly, I'll be speaking about the lesson learned from the viewpoint of Japan. Okay. About the major development, I try to be very, very short about this, because I know that I've got only 30 minutes. So just as I said, I think it is correct to understand that everything started in 2014 when Russia started the annexation of Crimea and started the war in Donbass. So it is the turning post-Soviet territorial dispute into the open assault on Ukraine's territory. And everybody knows that there's a big, sort of movement in 2021, but I will skip that because of the time, and I will start with the full-scale invasion aggression in 2022. So it is a transforming the conflict. It's the largest interstate war in Europe since the World War II. So what happened at the outset of this aggression is that Russia failed to say its kill, and the discovery of atrocities in Bucha hardened Western sanction, military aid, and war crimes investigation. I'm touching upon the Bucha issue particularly because everything was revealed exactly after 2-3 weeks of lecture time. I mean, Bucha was occupied by Russia in March, and in April, the atrocity of Bucha, massacre of Bucha, revealed at the first week of April. So we're having the whole 4th year of this tragedy in Bucha. So I'm touching upon this issue particularly for your attention. And in autumn 2022, Ukraine counteroffensive in Kharkiv and Kherson proves that the Russian gains were reversible and boosted confidence in Ukraine's ability to retake territory. So about the major development from 2023 to 2026, this year. So in 2023, Ukraine's much anticipated counteroffensive stalled against dense Russian defenses and minefields, pushing the war into a long war of attrition. In 2024, Russia captured Avdiivka, but Ukraine also carries the war onto Russian territory with its Kursk incursion, underscoring the new phase of escalation. In 2025, there's a renewed diplomacy returned, obviously because of the inauguration of Trump's administration, but the Istanbul talks exposed how far apart the two sides remained, with Russia still pressing punitive maximalist terms. And we have already had the 2-3 months of this year, 2026. So the war entered into the 5th year with no settlement in sight. Peace talks stalled again with Russia continued large-scale drone and missile attacks, and Europe moved to sustain support for Ukraine, instead of the US. So I'll be speaking more about how this war have got an implication for for East Asia. So Japan, it is often, I think it is really important to point out that Russia is a neighbor country of Japan. So Ukraine and Japan is sharing a sort of same problem because we have got the aggressor very, very close to our neighbor. So Russia is not only attacking Ukraine, but also it is increasing pressure on Japan over territorial issues. So there's a lot of intimidation and interference from the side of Russia, even though Russia is continuing its war against Ukraine. But at the same time, we have got a particular problem in East Asia as well, because China is enabling Russia's resilience through sanction evasion and expanded economic cooperation. It is often reported that many of the Russian weapon has got a component of Chinese product. So it is quite clear that China is helping Russia in order to continue its war. And at the same time, Russia is buying a very important part of its Russian energy even after the sanction. So it is clear that China is the decisive enabler for Russia to continue its war. So the term of decisive enabler, it was used by NATO in 2025. And that evaluation, I have to say, is quite accurate. And we need to talk about North Korea as well, because from 2024 and the whole throughout 2025, Japan's media was occupied with the topic that North Korea is very actively cooperating with Russia. It has got a strategic cooperation agreement with Russia, so it has got a strategic military relationship with Russia. So it means that North Korea is now directly involved through its treaty with Russia, and it's sending troops to the one part of Russia in order to fight against Ukrainian troops. So it is raising a risk that wartime experience will be transferred back to the Korean Peninsula when the war probably settles in Ukraine in the future. So it means that North Korea is bringing all its experiences and its all, tactics and etc. to Korean Peninsula, and how the North Korea is going to use that experience and tactics is still unknown, but it is obviously considered as a huge risk for the security environment of East Asia. So how Japan has responded, I think it is very, very difficult to summarize Japan's response in a one page of PowerPoint, but I still try to do that. So in 2022, it is the era of startup, or it is the period of rapid adaptation for Japan's diplomacy in order to adapt the new reality of the Russian aggression against Ukraine. So it's at an unprecedented scale of sanction vis-à-vis Russia, and it's at an unprecedented scale of assistance towards Ukraine. In 2023, it's coincided with the year of G7 presidency for Japan. And even in Japan, the exclusively Hiroshima summit in summer was focused probably too much, because it was a kind of a dramatic summit, because it's Hiroshima in Hiroshima summit, Japan invited President Zelensky to that, and it made a very intensive diplomacy by inviting Zelensky, by having Zelensky as a guest for the G7 countries in Hiroshima. But at the same time, for example, with Japan's assistance vis-à-vis Ukraine's challenge for anti-corruption, or Ukraine's challenge for the restoring its infrastructure, Ukraine's challenge for restoring its education and transportation and legal system, etc. Japan did a great job, I think, in order to make the best of its timing of being the G7 presidency. So the year 2023 was a year that Japan flourished its diplomacy and flourished its connection and partnership by using its position as a G7 presidency. In 2024, the very important moment came when Japan signed the Accord of Support for Ukraine and cooperation between the government and Japan. So it is the 10-year commitment for Japanese government for the assistance of Ukraine. So even though Japan started very actively, but at the same time very rapidly, the sanction against Russia and assistance towards Ukraine, it tried to put that sort of assistance in the middle-term perspective using 10 years. In 2025, things are has been experienced a bit of change, because for 2022, 2023, and 2024, the assistance that I have explained so far haven't got such a huge discussion or huge debate within Japan. But in 2025, things were a little bit different, because Japan decided to join the ERA, extraordinary revenue acceleration. So what's this? So it is the kind of a G7 framework together with the EU to use the profit from confiscated Russian assets, which has been frozen since the start of the full-scale aggression by Russia. So even it is the use of the profit of Russian frozen assets, there has been a huge legal and diplomatic debate in Japan whether or not it is right for Japan to use the profit of Russian freeze assets in order to help Ukraine. Because some say that it may worsen the relationship of Japan and Russia, and it may have a risk of Japan being sued by Russian government. And it is there's of course a concern that such use of the profit from confiscated Russian assets may be a lot of challenge in terms of the international law. But for Japan, the discussion was settled somehow in that Japan is using this profit of assets in order only for using it the non-lethal weapon purposes. And in 2026, there's a potential, not yet the final decision, but the potential that Japan is joining the NATO scheme of Pearl, prioritized Ukraine requirement list. So for those who are not really familiar with this system, it is a direct response. The Pearl is a direct response for Trump's administration's halt of helping Ukraine in its weapon. So in Biden administration, the U.S. sent a certain chunk of weapon to Ukraine, but from the time of the inauguration of Trump's administration, Trump refused to provide the weapons for free, obviously, saying that it is not the interest for the U.S. citizen. So instead of the U.S. providing the military assistance to Ukraine directly, the NATO countries, some of the NATO countries, decided to buy weapons from the U.S. and provide that to Ukraine instead of the U.S. So it is a buying up system by European nations in order to help Ukraine by using the U.S. weapons. So there is a discussion at this moment that Japan may be joining this Pearl system. But again, instead of providing lethal weapons, it is highly likely that Japan is providing the non-lethal weapons by using this Pearl initiative once again. So I'm coming very closely to my conclusion. So what is a lesson learned for Japan? So since the start of the Russian aggression against Ukraine, I mean the full-scale aggression against Ukraine, Japanese people started to understand that what we have understood as the notion of occupation is very, very different from what is really going on in Russia, in Ukraine, when it is compared to the occupation that Japan itself has experienced after the end of the Cold War, after the end of the World War II. Because in Japan, the US did the occupation, and in there, yes, there has been a bit of trouble. Yes, there has been antagonism against the US occupation of Japan, but it has been a rather benign and a rather stable and smooth occupation conducted by the US. But when it's come to the Russian occupation against Ukraine, there has been a very, very hard reality of that. For example, I give you the two examples of the Russian occupation of Ukraine. One is a passportization, or what we call Russification. So Russia provides passport to the Ukrainian people in occupied territory, and then Ukrainian people with that Russian passport have to have a life as a Russian nation, Russian citizen. So it has got education by Russian language. It has got education by Russian curriculums, not Ukraine curriculums. So it has got the civil services, including employment or the contact of the water or gas, etc., by using the citizenship of Ukraine. So being occupied is it equals the deportation or deprivation of the Ukrainian identity and national status. And at the same time, there's been a lot of reports concerning the abduction of children in occupied territory. So I'm coming back to the issue because this issue of abduction of children is a very important topic or a very important topic for all the countries, including Japan, including Brazil, and many other countries who doesn't necessarily wholeheartedly support Ukraine by giving military assistance or non-military assistance. So it is the topic that the world, the international community, has to deal with in cooperation. So how can we summarize the move by Russia in terms of Ukraine? So I think it is really correct to understand that it is the new style of imperialism that Russia is taking vis-a-vis Ukraine, because it is trying to eliminate Ukrainian identity, Ukrainian language, and it is expanding territory by using the military force. So it really resembles what we have seen as imperialism like many, many years ago, but the history is still repeating, and Russia is starting the imperialism vis-a-vis its neighboring countries. So whether it can stop it by Ukraine, in Ukraine, is a huge question. So for example, Georgian government has got a very awkward or special relationship with Russia, because it in Georgia as well, 20% of its territory is occupied by Russia, but at the same time, it has got a very close relationship with Russian government as well. So that's sort of a paradoxical sort of relationship between Georgian government and Russian government can probably obscure what may happen afterwards. But at the same time, I often visit Baltic countries and Poland or Czech republics, and everybody that I see is fearing who's next. For example, Estonia is sharing its border with Russia. If you go to the neighboring, village of Estonia, Russia is a few steps away. So many Estonian people is really fearing that Russia is going to invade Estonia in the second stage, or if Russia wins the war against Ukraine. And also, what is more complicating is that the US is getting to be a new potential risk for the new for European security environment or the global security environment as well. In 2026, we were shocked by the news of the Trump's administration attack against Venezuela and Trump's demands concerning Greenland, even though it is still not taking Greenland by force. But at the same time, we are witnessing the war against Iran by the US and Israel. So the war started elsewhere, and the war conducted by the United States. So even though so far from 2014 to 2025, all the European nations consider that the US is still a country who can provide security for them. But at this moment, probably US is having a military operation even further, and it could destabilize international security environments. So it is topping up the potential, risks and challenges to international security. So I would like to say that the existence and the policy of U.S. administration is making things more complicated. And what Japan has learned already from the war against Ukraine. So we were really astonished to see that Ukrainian people are still fighting back against Russia. And the key word, I think, is resilience. So what's making Ukraine as it is the importance of resilience. So it is fighting back for the sake of its territory. And in order to fight against it is very important to have the healthiness and resilience concerning infrastructure. So in Japan at this moment, the overall and fundamental strengthening of the Japan's defense position is very, very important. So this is what Takaichi government is trying to do at this moment. So the background is obviously the war continues in Ukraine, and the importance of resilience is recognized by quite a few people in Japan. But there's of course still a lesson unlearned for Japan as well. For example, Japanese people get pretty shocked by seeing, just as I said before, that the Ukraine children were taken from Ukraine territory to Russia or Russian occupied territory. So in order to fight back against this situation, I think it is very, very vital for Japanese government to cooperate with other countries in order to take Ukraine children back to its own territory. So how Japan can cooperate with, for example, global South countries to settle the issue. For example, how Japan can, cooperate or contribute to the peacemaking process. How Japan can contribute to bringing back Ukraine children to Ukraine territory. So that is a huge topic that we still need to consider with the help and with the coordination and cooperation with many other countries. And I think Brazil has got a very special position in terms of the solution and probably the involvement for the peace process, because for the 2 consecutive years, I understand that China and Brazil had a joint statement on Ukraine. So I have to say that for Ukrainian people, the term of the Ukraine crisis, it's not that comfortable because it is already the aggression, it is already an invasion. But they are still, Chinese government and Brazilian government is using the term of the Ukraine crisis. So this is a bit of the difference between perception between the Ukrainian who are actually attacked and the China-Brazil cooperation who is seeking to have a swift settlement of the issue. But I think it is really important that China and Brazil repeated this sort of statement in order to show their willingness to actively contribute the debate which is going on in order to help Ukraine to get out of this situation as soon as possible. And at the same time, I need to emphasize that the deportation of the children of Ukraine and the issue that the returning of such children is conducted by huge cooperation with global South countries. I presented the example of Qatar, but at the same time, many other countries, including Turkey, Saudi Arabia, South Africa, and some other countries have already committed to work with Russia and Ukraine in order to bring children back home. So this is the kind of web of cooperation that Japan still needs to actively be involved. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Higashino, for such an insightful lecture. I now invite Dr. Ryu Tinto for his commentary.
Thank you so much, Julia. Thank you so much, Professor Higashino, for your enticing talk. Thought it was very interesting in so many points and very poignant exemplification of and told history of the conflict. It shows and it gives us details and a lot for us to think about how the conflict has evolved in Ukraine, which is something we have been very attentive to in the last few years. As someone that studies international security, I've been telling my students and telling everyone that for a very long time we were always studying international security from the perspective and from the privileged position of not having to deal with major wars in our in the world, and this has recently took a very unexpected or maybe somewhat expected turn, but a very significant turn nonetheless. So these are obviously situations which we must remain attentive to. I'll not try to contribute so much on the point of the history and development of the war in Ukraine, but try to focus more on the changes that it presents to the world and how maybe Japan and Brazil can try to work together or to what's the role of countries such as Brazil and Japan in this, and also try to think a little bit about the perspective that Brazil has on this. I think that one of the key factors that you lined up very, very well, and I think it's notable, is that Russians seem to have miscalculated on what they thought that this war is going to be. They were not expecting this war to turn into a war of aggression, a war of attrition, and that it would be considered and it would give the opportunity for the world to look at it and to react to it and to understand this as being a war of aggression and all of the implications that this has to the system, right? So I think that's one of the key things there is the Russian expectation that this would be really quick has implications, not only implications for the immediate strategic developments of the war, but also for how Russia thought that this would be quickly solved and there would not be enough time for the world to look at Russia in the way it does now, as a sort of pariah status or looking at it as an aggressor. They thought it would be so quick the world even wouldn't have time to react to that. This is what I think, but this didn't come true, and in fact this is one of the key things that seems to me that is going against Russia at this point. The war, both Russia and Ukraine already seem to have understand that they are into this war of attrition, and that they will be into this for some time if things doesn't change. So there's an increasing value. Both sides see an increasing value on being able to keep the war for a long time. Not in the sense that they want to prolong the war. I don't think neither side wants to prolong the war any time more than what's necessary, but the idea that they understand that it is a strategic asset to be able to continue fighting on the long run, because that's what's going to be decisive for this war. And obviously for Russia, this means having supportive allies that sustain, that help Russia with human capabilities, as Professor Higashino noted, but also to skirt sanctions, also with industrial capabilities and so on and so forth. And for Ukraine, that's mostly being able to count on support from countries that think that Russia's position is not correct, and in that they want to support Ukraine for this war, in this war for the long run, right? So I think that's sort of very important criteria that we need to consider. Moreover, another thing that I think it's quite important is that this war, and then the situation also on the recent situation in the Middle East, has been cementing this idea that the security architecture of the international system is changing radically and fast. And that means, and I think that's where I really start my sort of key point here, and is the erosion of the rules-based order in the world is not seen, I think, even though at times Japan and Brazil might be in sort of different sides when it comes to the Russian-Ukrainian situation in Ukraine or the war. Brazil, it's very clear to me that both Japan and Brazil look at the erosions of the rules-based international system with very bad eyes, right? They both would like the rules-based international system to remain. And I think both countries they see the appeal and the advantage of having that system. And in that sense, I think there's a lot of room for cooperation, and there's a lot of room for both Brazil and Japan and many other countries, which Professor Higashino mentioned, Turkey, several others, to act and to step up to their position of middle powers. I know that the terminology of middle powers is a very complicated terminology, and it raises lots of eyebrows among political science, international relation analysts. But it seems to me there's a net gain for countries that see themselves as middle powers of sort of trying to raise up now, and to try to show that there is a place, there is a role for middle powers in the world. That vacuum of power, that the vacuum of power or the vacuum of ideas that we see with American disengagement might be supported, if not, I don't want to say filled, but it could be supported by a stronger position from middle powers. And I think that with some surprise, because I think that would be not the main expectation that analysts would have, but I think that's to some surprise. Security issues might be issues where those middle powers can raise and step up and say, look, we have something to say about this, and we are worried, this worries us, we have reasons to be concerned, and we need to step up and do something about it. So in that sense, I think that there's a lot of possible constructive connections between middle powers that can be done even when there are differences between the countries, to support their own national interests, but also the international rules-based system. Right. I think Japan and Brazil can and should push more into this direction of reinforcing those roles for both countries. Even if Brazil and Japan will not be speak entirely in one voice all the time, which again is very common and very understandable in terms of diplomacy, right? I think there's a lot of room for cooperation and mutual understanding that both countries can achieve, and that also creates spaces for I think that even to a certain point, being able to unite different ideas around the idea of cooperation and rules and expectations and the idea that the world works better when it's orderly and expectations are met and things work as expected. I think there's a good way to show that. It's a good way to show that we go back to a world where even with differences we can try and work together instead of taking this sort of trench-like approach to politics, which seems to be more common now. Of course, these two conflicts that are ongoing, I don't think, again, neither Brazil nor Japan nor most of the countries from the global south or the middle powers, including those that are more related to the global north. I don't think Australia or many other countries around are directly, none of the countries want to see war in the system, right? They all want to see a peaceful system, and I think that this goal could be much more explored even at the presence of important differences. So I guess in a way I'm trying to offer this sort of positive, hopeful expectation that maybe something there's a potential that these conflicts may help countries to try and connect to each other in ways they were not connecting before, over the common goal of making the world less unstable and more stable and more prone to expectations and to the common or that the world works, the international system works for the common good, whatever possible. This obviously, there's some barriers to this, and as Professor Higashino showed, we often don't think about this too much, but Japan and Russia are very close in the sense of geographical sense. There are old and persistent territorial disputes that are not entirely solved by both countries, and that have been managed over several years. So it was a few years ago, it was not really thinkable that Russia and Japan would enter on like actual skirmishes because of territory, right? There's a process, there's rules, and those territorial disputes will be solved by normal procedures. Now, given the instability of the world, and I think the general instability of security arrangements of the world, much more than the specifics of wars that are happening in Ukraine or in the Middle East, but because of the more sort of generally not so orderly security arrangements, I completely understand the sort of Japanese position that's more worried about its territorial claims with Russia. And I also very much understand and can see that Japan and other East Asian countries are worried about the stability of the security arrangements that kept East Asia peaceful as far as possible. And the expectation that this will hold over time is becoming harder and harder to trust, which is obviously of great concern. There are no shortage of points of tension in East Asia, which again were managed from the 1990s onwards by careful construction of security arrangements that provided that security for those countries. This also puts Japan on a sort of difficult position, I think, which is to have to negotiate and to be halfway between a very powerful and strong alliance that they have, that Japan and the US have, but also with being at odds with the US in politically in some issues, and how that can go together and be balanced with different positions that Japan has on other topics, and how those two things can be put together. And of course, there are a number of multilateral arrangements that sustain East Asia's security arrangements, and I particularly think that those have always been an asset in East Asia, but the general erosion of a multilateral system presents challenges to those multilateral arrangements, right? Which again contributes to the instability of the region and the wider world. So what I want to sort of finish here, I think, is I think there's a potential space for cooperation in a number of issues that are considered sort of low-hanging fruit when it comes to security. but that would enable Brazil and Japan to create closer ties in security, but also that to push forward the agenda towards this sort of more, again, to the more international, the rules-based international system. And I think that a number of things that Japan has been already talking about, and also I think Brazil also has some experience on this in terms of peacekeeping operations, assistance in humanitarian aid. I think Japan is very capable and very well known in demining operations, if I'm not mistaken. And I think that this is a sorely needed capability in Ukraine. Brazil also has quite some knowledge on this area. So there could be a number of ways in which maybe the two countries can work together to advance those sort of low-hanging humanitarian initiatives that can help support the situation and peace and security, global peace and security, but also in particular what's going on in Ukraine, and try to help initiatives that will promote peace both in Ukraine as in the Middle East, which I think it's the goal of both parties. Just to really end, I think that another thing that it's very important. We also here in Brazil, we tend to look at ourselves, and in Latin America generally, as sort of insulated from this whole from conflict and from wars and from instability in general. We look at ourselves as being a very peaceful region, but as we have seen lately, the effects of conflict elsewhere are very much sensible here. I think that cooperation between Brazil and Japan to build resilience is very important, and is also very important in terms of cybersecurity, hybrid threats, but also critical infrastructure, resilience on disasters, and all kinds of things there, where Japan has a lot of know-how, and there could be contribution also on that sense. And just to give like two questions, I think I have two big questions that I would like to pose to Professor Higashino to get the debate started. And first, I think is try to generally wrap up and to concentrate those things that I've been mentioning so far. So one question, Professor Higashino, would be, how do you see Brazil and Japan being able to jointly work, if that would be something that would be politically possible, how Brazil and Japan could try and jointly promote a Ukraine peace formula platform that is acceptable for both countries, but also that sort of respects Brazil's engagement with the global South, also the relationship between Japan and India, and all sorts of dynamics, but at the same time giving consideration to each country's diplomatic constraints, right? And I think that another thing would be what we tend to look at all the bad things that we get from the Ukrainian conflict and from the war in Ukraine, but what can we learn, and what can we learn, both Latin America and East Asia? What can we learn about Ukraine's resilience that we can bring to our political sphere, to our societies, to our capability to respond to threats, and our capability to deal with uncertainty? So I guess that's what I had to offer as commentary. I thank you once again very much, Professor Higashino, for your talk and for your availability to be here today, and all the participants of this webinar. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So without asking Julia to
You may go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I thank you very much, Professor Daniel. So I agree 100% with your comment, in particular, the need to reconsider and perhaps rebuild or boost up the notion of the middle power argument, because it is really important that we have got for example, a very, weak military power. We haven't got the natural resources, and territory. The size of the territory is not at all huge. So even though Brazil and Japan is having a the very representative place still in the world stage. For example, Brazil is a part of the core countries of the global south, including BRICS, and Japan is at the same time having many of the prestigious stages in terms of the Japan-US alliance. They are very much strengthening Japan-Europe relationship. We still have got quite limited diplomatic resources to deal with. So I think recognizing once again that in this Trump administration era, we are having a very limited source that we can use. But because of that, the cooperation matters even more. So by reconsidering and revisiting the notion of middle power, we can do many things together. So I'm partly already answering your first and second question. In terms of the Brazil-Japan cooperation or promotion as a peace formula, let me start with the latter of peace formula, because at this moment, I think we are having a very limited kind of influence, in particular to Russia, because now it seems that the Russian administration is only hearing and listening from what the US says at this moment. So it hasn't got the lot of appetite to listen, in particular from Ukraine, listen in particular from European countries and the rest of the world. But I think it is really important that we are, or in particular Brazil and Japan, having got a functional sort of a contribution to what is really going on in Ukraine. For example, Professor Daniel, you mentioned the demining. I think it is very, very important that Japan and Brazil act together. At this moment, Ukraine is the world's largest mine-affected area. So having a lot of demining contribution is our top priority, I think. In lands, in sea, we can have a cooperation together. And let me remind you that the Japan and Cambodia has already got 2-3 years of cooperation in terms of demining in Ukraine. So Cambodia is a country that Japan assisted for many, many years in order to promote the demining in Cambodia. And now Cambodia has got the very distinctive expertise in order to demine the other countries. So once Japan helped Cambodia, and now Cambodia is helping other countries. So we are already having this sort of experience, but if Japan and Brazil act together in order to help Ukrainian demining process, that has got a huge impact. Yeah, for not only for Ukraine, but also for the peace building and reconstruction in world's unstable area. And I think it duplicates with the answer of your second question. What is a lesson learned? The common lesson learned for Latin America and East Asia. I think, just as I said in my lecture, I think the notion of the resilience is not the exclusive notion for NATO, but also for the many other countries, including Latin America and East Asia. For example, at the very start of the Russian aggression against Ukraine, airport was attacked, rail transportation was attacked, and the harbor and ports were closed. This sort of a very vital infrastructure needs to have a more resilience. And for that, we can share the techniques, we can share the protection or strength, the fortification of this sort of very vital infrastructure. So this is something that we can, in the first place, share experience. And at the same time, so thirdly, I think it's really important that Japan and Latin America start to talk about the potential defense cooperation or the producing of the weapons if necessary. So that is something that Japan can flexibly act in order to deal more actively to the war-torn area together with a country like Brazil.
Thank you, Professor Higashino. Thank you, Professor Huicinto. This was very insightful. I'm happy to report that you already answered some of the questions that we have from our audience. So that's great. I have a question here that is, how does the current conflict in Iran affect the war in Ukraine? Does the rising price of oil help Russia sustain its war effort? And I know you mentioned a little bit of Iran in your speech. So if you could delve a little bit into the implications for both Brazil and Japan, it would be great. Please feel free to start.
Yeah, let me start with the implication to Japan and Brazil, because it is much, much easier to answer, because it is hitting our economy, two countries' economies, very hard, because of the rapid rise of energy prices, and it is already showing that sort of tendency. So I think it is really important that just as the IEA decided to have its reserves open to the countries, we need to have more cooperation in terms of the energy challenges. So I think it is important. But in terms of its implication towards the war in Ukraine, if this attack against Iran happened like 2-3 years ago, things may have been largely different. Because at that time, Iran was helping Russia to provide the large number of drone Shahed. So Russia was really helped by that sort of Iran's exportation of that drone or any other weapon component. But at the same time, Russia learned from Iran, and it can in itself, it can produce Shahed type drone already by themselves. It can have a licensed production of kind of Shahed within the territory of Russia. So now the implication of Iran's, being attacked by the US and Israel is not really affecting the Russian's ability to continue its war, because Iran has helped already so much by spending for the past 2-3 years. So now the implication is, I think, small, because Russia is already, having a lot of expertise, a lot of experience from Iran, even though there's a UN resolution not to do that. So again, the rise of the energy prices, it helps Russia to comfortably sell its energies to the rest of the world. So I think it is unfortunately helping Russia in order to strengthen its ability to continue the war against Ukraine. So this is my concern.
Thank you so much. We have another question. How does Japan's strong alignment and unprecedented cooperation with NATO during the Ukraine crisis affect Beijing's perception of security and alter the already delicate balance of power in Sino-Japanese relations in East Asia?
Yes. That is a wonderful question. Thank you very much for that. I probably think that you were talking, the person who kindly questioned me was talking about the system of PEAR. So the system that the NATO countries are buying up US weapons in order to provide to Ukraine. So the proportion that Japan can contribute to that PEAR system is, fortunately or unfortunately, very, very small. Since it is limited to the northeastern weapons, And power is a priority of the Ukrainian requirement, but Ukraine needs lethal weapon rather than anything else, including a defense system. But for Japan, it is not possible at this moment to buy, for example, Patriot from the US on behalf of Ukraine and give it to Ukraine. So China already knows that the Japan's contribution to NATO is not that big. And when we speak about the Japan's contribution to NATO, it's already started to some extent, because NATO has got a cooperation framework with the so-called IP4 countries, Indo-Pacific 4, meaning Australia, New Zealand, Japan, and South Korea. So China has got a lot of seeds of concerns, but China has got several, reason to see that, consider that the Japan and NATO relationship is further strengthened in the course of time. But China already also knows that it is not something which threatens the existential status of China. So this is my answer.
Thank you so much for your insightful response. Sadly, we are out of time, but this has been a great webinar. I would like to thank both the Japan House São Paulo, Mr. Carlos Rosa, for your continued collaboration with FGV. We are very happy. And Professor Higashino and Professor Hicinto, thank you so much for your time, for accepting our invitation. This was a very insightful lecture, and I hope the public is also very happy with your insights. Thank you so much, and have a good evening.